Bismillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Lockdown Library with me, Asim Qureshi. So before I start the next review, the original review I wrote of this book, as I was writing it, a video appeared on my social media of Greek coast guards. They were in their kind of boat, larger boat, and they had a rod, and they were using this rod to push away refugees who were in a rubber boat who were attempting to land on the coast of Greece, but they weren't permitting them to do so. So they were actually physically pushing this rubber boat away, and actually made me quite sick to see this happen. That these human beings who were in need were being physically put back out to sea. And I guess almost like in a way that people used to do in old rites, when they would place people in boats, and rather than burying them, just like send them off into the sea to die out there. It just had that feel very much about it. So kind of reminded me that the issue of immigration is real. It has so much relevance in our lives today, and that's why it just so happened that I was reviewing this book, Bordering Britain. So you can see the clever titling, because yes, it is very much about ordering Britain. Law, Race and Empire by Dr. Nadine Al-Anani from Birkbeck University. So Dr. Al-Anani, what she's doing is she's presenting us a history of immigration law and the way that immigration is practiced at a policy level, particularly in the UK. But by going back in history and understanding, well, where do these ideas come from? How do we have the current system of immigration that we do? Because both people on the right and even indeed liberals, they often claim that history should be relegated to the past, that it has no relevance, there's no contemporary significance. So even you'll find many liberals say, well, what has slavery got to do with the way that the world is organized today? And I think it's so important that people like Dr. Nadine are really working very hard in order to help us understand the connections that exist, how the structures and the systems that we have today are so much based around what has happened in the past. So the book specifically shows how a colonial narrative of the hierarchy of races is rooted in our UK immigration policy. That immigration itself, she writes, is a contemporary colonial space, by arguing that it is a non-settler colonial state. I mean, that in itself is fascinating, because we don't tend to think of the UK like that. We have this kind of imagination about the UK being this very open space, the space that really welcomes people and allows them in. But really, the reality is quite far from the truth. In fact, when we look at the way in which immigration has been instituted in terms of law as well as practice, we get to see all of the cracks. And that's the clever thing about this book. It leaves no space for there to be any doubt about how utterly racist our system actually is. And what she does is that she goes back further than this, but she really roots this racist immigration architecture to the 1905 Aliens Act. She says the Aliens Act has a racializing effect, making people categorized as aliens disproportionately vulnerable to harm and premature death, either because they were turned away at the border or through exposure to violence and destitution in Britain. So while this legislation existed to stop people coming into the British territories. Why that's so fascinating is because in really stark contrast, it was not doing anything at all to stop uh, people from the colonial metropole, from the UK itself, the indigenous white population, from freely traveling to North and South America, to Australia, to different parts of Africa. So there was no restriction of movement for those who were in the colonial metropole itself. These restrictions were only being applied to those who were trying to come in. And so we already see this disparity in the arrangement of the way that some people are considered as opposed to others. And, you know, although this happened after Dr. Nadine wrote her book, you really see this with the Home Secretary, Priti Patel's announcement of a points-based immigration system and how that's reminiscent of a colonial policy. So Dr. Nadine gives the example of in 1897 of the British colony of Natal requiring £25 in order to be able to enter into the country. Now, in terms of today's money, that means that in order to come into the UK, you would need around £3,000. But also accompanied in much of the way that Priti Patel mentioned, you need a European language. Of course, Priti Patel's talking about English, but in Natal they said, okay, fine, any European language. Now, when any whites were coming into Natal, it was fine, no problem. They just accepted whatever language they spoke, no issues caused. But as soon as a person of color would arrive, they would change the yardstick by which language would be needed. So if they came speaking German, the authorities would say, no, the language we mean is English. And so it was used as a barrier to stop non-white people from really entering, even if they were able to meet the threshold of the £25 mark at the time. Of course, when you see the actual statement of the Prime Minister of Natal being presented by Dr. Nadine, he said the object of the bill is to deal with Asiatic immigrants. So I mean, it's very clear as day. What they were looking for specifically was a certain type of person to come in and to enter. And I guess, when we're reflecting on these books, it's so fascinating to know that the very people who have been involved in building this contemporary architecture as it stands right now, so the previous Home Secretary Sajid Javid and now Priti Patel, that their parents under the current system would have been stopped potentially from coming into the UK. And so even just the notion of why that's so fascinating, that these people have such a lack of understanding of what it means for them, what it have meant to them had they been impacted by the legislation that they are inextricably involved in promoting and backing up and kind of providing a brown face for. So it's something worth definitely thinking about. Of course, this is even more stark contrast when you think about the period within which this is all happening. So, if we're talking about the Aliens Act being 1905, then, within a decade, you have World War One. And who is fighting in World War One? It's brown and black people that in their hundreds and thousands, even millions, who are fighting, who are having to give up their lives in order to protect the interests of the British Empire. But they're never seen as citizens in the same way. They're never seen their contribution, however much I might have my own political disagreements and ethical disagreements with them being involved in empire and its protection. Put that aside, the fact that these people, were willing to put their lives on the line, that they were in the service of the British, it was only ever as outsiders. So we're willing for you to die on our behalf, but we're not willing to confer upon you the same rights as those who live within the metropole itself. And this is where Dr. Nadine Al-Nenni, she really shows the myth of this imperial unity that was being promoted. Like, the empire is one, we're all unified together. Well, it's not unity when everyone has a different status, that there is a hierarchy of races that exist. And she writes, the imperial myth of unity and equality was jettisoned, and the entitlement of uh, the racialized colony and Commonwealth citizens to enter and remain in Britain was ended. Through the concept of partiality, the 1971 Immigration Act made whiteness intrinsic to British identity. Under the Act, only patriots, those born in Britain or with a parent born in Britain, had a right of abode, and therefore the right to enter and stay in Britain. Again, it's so important what we're getting from, this straight line that can be drawn between 1905 to 1971's Immigration Act is this constant need to protect the white identity of the UK. No matter what you do for empire, whatever you do for the UK, that there is this constant need to protect the central identity of what the UK sees itself, and that occurs through the law. The law is there to protect that hegemony. So ultimately, we're told that a distinction is made between those who are citizens of the empire and those who are subjects of the empire. So who are the actual citizens? Well, it was supposed to be the white people. And how were minorities treated as subjects? Well, of course, they were treated in all the ways that we expect in terms of the worst excesses of capitalism. That they were treated really as products, as subjects that could just be used until their use came to an end, and then they could be shipped off, they could be sent elsewhere. And I think the thing that really reveals this more than anything else is the way in which we've seen, hundreds now of, in some cases, third, fourth generation British Muslims having their citizenship stripped and being told that they can't come back into the UK, based on this idea of bad behavior, that by virtue of you acting badly in some way, you are no longer entitled to your British citizenship, even if you were born and raised in this country. Even if you had never even been to your country of origin, that it doesn't matter, that for those who don't look like the indigenous white community of the UK, who don't have some kind of historical link to another country, that they are always potentially subject for being removed because the state doesn't like what they're involved with. And again, similarly, we see a lot of people being deported to Jamaica, for example, to the Caribbean, because it said, well, you acted badly, you were involved in crime, for crimes that are much lesser offenses than many things that white people are involved in, but their citizenships are not removed. They are not deported to other countries. And we've seen what's happened with the Windrush generation, where they en masse, these people were just sent back to countries that they had not been to since they were children or had not been to at all. And so this very bizarre situation emerges where the British government is able to exceptionalize people of color because they are able to through the law. So they use the law as a cover. Oh, well, we can do this because the law allows us to. But the law is unconscionable in this case. It is completely beyond any type of morality to treat people differently in these ways. And that is why we have to constantly remind ourselves that not only the immigration system, but the whole notion of citizenship in this country is predicated on racist terms. And that in order for us to actively be, kind of equal members of society, this architecture has to come down. This architecture has to stop. That we have to be campaigning against these all the time, whether it's happening to the Black community or the Muslim community, whoever's being affected by this. There has to be a pushback against it, because we will never truly exist on the same terms otherwise. That's never going to happen. And fine, we can have conversations about whether or not we should even want equal citizenship in a structurally racist system. But my point is really directed at the system itself. That we have to change it and the structures of racism that exist within it. Like, putting up tokenistic, kind of Muslim celebrities or Black celebrities, that's not representation. That's not what true equality looks like. If we want to actually say that we've moved beyond racism, the the racist laws that stop or make this distinction between citizen and subject, they have to come down. So ultimately, this work is teaching us really, though, how we can resist. That is the point that Dr. Nadina Neni is trying to get us to. How can we resist? And what she says is that the conceptualization I offer of irregularized migration as an anti-colonial resistance is primarily intended as counter-pedagogy to that of law, rather than being seen as rightfully at the mercy of legal status recognition processes. Racialized people must both be understood and understand themselves as being collectively entitled to the reclamation of wealth accumulated via colonial dispossession. I am thus responding to the urgent need for a politics of migrant solidarity and racial justice in colonial contexts, which resists that of state recognition. I mean, it's for me, I really get the sense of what she's trying to do here and what she's trying to say, which is we need to come together in order to really push back against the law itself, to say that, this law is wrong. We need to find alternative ways of coming together in order that we can be seen on our own terms and not constantly trying to vie for recognition within a system that doesn't see us as equal in the first place. So I hope you'll buy Dr. Nadine Al-Neni's book. It's an extremely fascinating account. Again, it's difficult to go through all of the details that she goes through in the book, but you'll learn a lot on the other side of it. So again, highly recommended. Inshallah, I look forward to your thoughts about it. Jazakum Allah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.